Welcome back to the show with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio. With me, I have Conservative MP for Sutton, Cheam and
Worcester Park.
Paul Scully's here with me, doing his best to defend his colleague, Chris Grayling, and I think you did a very good job, Paul. Thank you.
You're very kind.
Now, we started talking a little bit about immigration because we've had those figures that EU immigration has dropped dramatically. Outside of EU immigration has increased. Paul, you said you wanted a sort of everybody to be treated equally, a level playing field. Now, let's see what our guest has got to say. Stephen Slater joins us on the line, senior immigration lawyer at OTS Solicitors. Welcome back to the show, Stephen.
Good evening. Nice to be back.
It's great to have you. I'm fascinated by the immigration conversation, and I'm fascinated in it because I feel that there's a lot of misconception going on, perhaps because people don't quite understand how it works, perhaps because the media insist on blaming immigrants for pretty much everything, although post-Brexit we don't get to see that anymore. But what about Paul's concern? And I've heard that from plenty of people, and I think perhaps there's some merit in it. A level playing field for all. So it doesn't matter whether you're from former Commonwealth areas, whether you're from any part of the world, or you're from the EU. Some British people want to treat everybody with a level playing field. What's wrong with that?
Well, we used to have a level playing field back in the 1960s. Before the 1968 Commonwealth Immigrants Act, Commonwealth citizens had free movement to come to the UK. And the then Home Secretary, James Callaghan, was stuck in the 1960s equivalent of the Brexit debate. And they took away the right of abode of Commonwealth citizens in exactly the same sort of political environment. They had the Smethwick by-election, where a Labour Member of Parliament lost his seat because of intrigues about race. And a Labour Home Secretary decided to solve a problem, in inverted commas, in relation to immigration. So they took away a right of abode of Commonwealth citizens. But they were wrong then, and they're as wrong now, because net migration is vital to keeping the working age population in Britain at a sustainable level, because the country's birth rate is falling.
Paul?
Well, that's fair enough, but I don't think anyone mainstream is talking about stopping all immigration, but it's just getting that balance right. And in terms of, I'm not sure that's answered the question about why it doesn't matter where they come from, but I think I'm very much saying that immigration is a good thing for the reasons that you said, that it is important that people come in, that we can get the jobs covered. I would like to see a little bit more work done by British companies and public sector, actually, where they've almost moved to a default position in certain areas when they've gone first abroad with contracts to whether it's Poland, Spain, and further afield to source their employees, rather than actually looking at a pool of people here. But as I say, it's getting the balance right. That's all I've ever asked for.
Stephen, do you think that we could function with a sort of a level playing field immigration system? Because it's and I'm going to be very simplistic, I've already admitted to Paul that I'm a bit of an idiot when it comes to something like immigration, because I don't know the process. So help me out here, because you would know the process. So if we treated everybody on a level playing field, or we go to something like another big favourite of a lot of Leave voters, a points-based system like Australia, how would that work? If I am a chain of well-known coffee shops around the country and I need another 50 baristas by next month, what do? Do I just knock on the government door and go, can I have some 50 baristas, please? And they find them for me. I mean, how does it actually work?
Well, currently, you have to become what's called a Tier 2 sponsor. So the employer has to register with the Home Office, and they've got to do a labour market skills test. So they have to demonstrate to the Home Office that they can't fill a vacancy from the domestic population. They have to place advertisements, show that they can't recruit the necessary staff. And then, once they've got their sponsorship license, then they can issue Tier 2 visas to a small number of people. And it's currently capped at 24,000 a year. But both the government and the opposition are advocating scrapping that system. The government's white paper has said that it's going to abolish the Tier 2 visa system and replace it with an industry-wide system of permits. So a sort of Soviet-style system where the government will issue permits to people who can come and work. And that's never going to work in a dynamic labour market which has millions of participants with hundreds of thousands of employers who need skilled people at lots of different levels, high-level skills, medium skills, and low-level skills. So it's an absurdly bureaucratic system, and I'm sure Mr. Scully he's a Conservative MP, he's an advocate of the intelligent hand of the market. So the idea that the state can now step in and tell industries and employers how many staff they can and cannot have is ridiculous.
Well, again, it's balanced. I mean, look, I mean that's a white paper. This is why it's important to have as much opinion in it as possible, like from people like yourself. But we do have to find the right balance because yes, I believe in the free market. Of course, I do as a Conservative. It's something that, for example, I'll give you a silly example that I do a lot of work with British Bangladeshis. So actually, it's not very silly for them. But they reckon about 100,000 British Bangladeshis that work in the curry restaurant trade. And what has happened in the past, they are struggling at the moment. Part of that is down to immigration, although there are many other extenuating factors, but they tend to latch on to immigration as being the big driver of why they're struggling. What has happened in the past? They had the sponsorship visas that you described back in the early 2000s, and then there was a sense that many of them were abusing the system, and so the government has always been whenever I've lobbied for relatively minor changes, the government have always pushed back at me based on sort of 15-year-old, 10-year-old. Stereotypes, I suppose, of people bringing their cousins in, maybe working in the kitchen for a little while and then disappearing off into the system elsewhere. And it's that sense of, and that's not really free market. That's all an abuse of the market. So you do need some sort of check, as I say, to make sure that that's not happening. But how light or heavy-handed that needs to be, then that's up for discussion.
Stephen, what are the advantages that we are potentially going to be losing by having the free movement of people by leaving the EU? And in particular, I know we've spoken about this. We touched upon it once in a hurry. That's why it's nice to have you back on. But the claim that, well, all this unhindered EU immigration drives down wages, particularly in the low-skilled area of our jobs market.
No, I mean, that's a complete fallacy, and that argument has been comprehensively trashed by the government's own Migration Advisory Committee. They spent a very long period of time and consulted dozens of respectable academic peer-reviewed studies into this subject, and they found over the life of our EU membership that EU migration has had no discernible effect on wages or employment. And there's a very common sense reason why that's the case. We have more people in work now than we've ever had since official records began in 1971. We have a labour market that consists of 35 million working age people. EU migration only contributes 2.29 million working age people. That's not big enough to make any impression. And most of those EU migrants are twice as likely to be graduates and high-skilled people. So the presence of high-wage, high-skilled people does not drive down the wages of low-skill, low-wage people. The thing that drives down their wages are changes in the way the labour market operates. Zero-hours contracts, agency working. That's what's driving down wages. It's nothing to do with migration at all, and it's a canard to suggest otherwise.
It's interesting. You talk to people in. No, I mean I have a lot of sympathy for that argument. I speak to a lot of people in parts of my constituency where you have the stereotype, the white van man, I suppose, in the north, where the construction workers, plumbers, plasterers, painters, decorators, etc., and they are clearly concerned. They always express a concern about this, but then you do get the odd household when you have people that are talking about they're driving down wages and they're taking all our welfare and our benefits and things. And I do have to sort of remind them that you can't really do both. You're either in work or you're not work. I know you can talk about in-work benefits, but sometimes too people do feed off some of the media coverage and social media and these kind of things. We always get chain emails and Facebook memes doing the rounds, which really don't help having a grown-up discussion about immigration.
Stephen, if we are to exit on the 29th of March, which is sort of looking highly unlikely, not that we'll exit, but it will happen on the 29th of March, may happen at a later date, of course. What do you think is available to the government as a means to make sure that we will have enough people coming into this country to do the jobs that need to be done? I know that we can't sort of magic up this amazing UK workforce that's been held back by EU migration. So if we are losing freedom of movement, is there anything the government can do to make sure that we don't run out of people to do the jobs that we need to get done?
Well, I'm afraid that the cost of it is going to be significant economic stagnation. Because if you look at the government's headline figure for net EU migration at the moment, it's 283,000. And people who, Nigel Farage and the rest, are fond of using this phrase, that's the equivalent of a city the size of Newcastle each year. And on the face of it, that sounds as if it's a compelling argument. But actually, if you look at the birth rate in the country, it's fallen every year for most of the last century. And the net growth in population, so if you take the number of people born each year and subtract the number of people who die, the net growth is only 193,000. And if you divide that by 650, that means in Paul's constituency, that's only 298 people, or 5 babies a week. And that's not enough to keep us going. So countries that have stagnating and falling working age populations can't support their pensioner population. And we're going to have another 3.4 million old age pensioners by 2030. I looked up Paul's constituency before I came on air. And in Sutton and Sheen, there are 62,000 working age people. But there are 14,000 old age pensioners. That's going to go up by another 5,500. So if your working age population is cut because of the loss of EU migration, who's going to support getting on for 20,000 old age pensioners in Paul's own constituency? Not sustainable, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if you heard the early part of the conversation before you came on. One of the things I was talking about is less to do with the economy, from my point of view, personally, is more to do with making sure that we can follow up with infrastructure. Because I can't remember the figure that you said when you divided by 650. When clearly my constituency is going to have a higher number of those people than a constituency, in another part of the country, perhaps, because London has its own draw. And so it's just making sure that I think you said about 300 people, something like that each year. The council have only managed to build, I think it's in the tens anyway of houses in the last 20 years. So keeping up with house building, for example, in my part of the country is really, really difficult, and school places are difficult. So these are reasons not to keep immigrants out of the country. They're reasons to plan carefully for this, because yes, we can talk about the free market. Yes, we can talk about making sure that we've got enough people to have the very real problem that you described. But how do we keep our elderly people? Look after them when it does get unbalanced like that. But how do we do it in a carefully controlled situation that doesn't put anybody down, it doesn't discriminate in a sort of negative context?
But it's a bit too late now, Paul. Sorry to jump in here, but I mean, your Prime Minister, well, our Prime Minister, that's the one thing that she keeps going on about, the Brexit will happen. We're leaving on the 29th of March, and every time she gets an opportunity, she says freedom of movement will end. We all remember the Breaking Point posters. I mean, let's be fair. Freedom of movement was weaponized in the referendum.
I mean, the Breaking Point was well, it was the Leave.eu lot. That was
it was
not
the Leave.eu
was...
lot, but it played to the same crowd,
and it was not good.
It played to the same crowd, and this fear that we're being overrun by migration, and that there's just too many people in the country, And Theresa May has been, consistently, even her time in the Home Office, the hostile environment. She is slightly obsessed with freedom of movement. And from what you hear from Stephen here on the line, the truth is that we need people desperately to be able to come, and if we make their job harder coming into this country and also unattractive, then we're going to be in a lot of trouble. Stephen, you said it's going to cost a lot to fill those vacancies we're going to lose freedom of movement. Is something as the point system, the Australian point system, can that do anything for us?
Well, but it's actually quite hard to win migration to the UK. One of the reasons that EU migration has fallen is not because of things that happen here in Britain, but because the minimum wage rates in Spain and France have been going up. And EU migrants, particularly those that work in the agricultural industry, will go where they can command the highest marginal rate. So Britain is now seen as a less attractive place for migration. And we are going to have a devil of a job filling those agricultural posts. And the government's proposal is a pilot scheme that's going to cover 2,500 people. You're not going to get people migrating from Commonwealth countries to come and do fruit picking jobs in East Anglia. It's just not going to sustain. And the implicit promise in abolishing free movement is that is going to lead to an improvement in wages and an improvement in employment. And that's going to prove to be the hollowest promise of all of the debate around the referendum, because it simply won't deliver. And what I find so frustrating about this process is that politicians who are too witless to work out how to solve the problems of our country take refuge in telling lies about migration because they haven't got a clue how to solve our domestic problems. And I think, really, we ought to put them on the spot and say, we're not interested in the smoke screen that you're putting up and playing off one community against another. You need to put them on the spot about why they're not delivering for the whole country, migrant or non-migrant.
Stephen, as always, thank you so much for the time. I'm only cutting it short because I have to go to break, but thank you for joining us. That's Stephen Slater, Senior Immigration Lawyer at OTS Solicitors. Want to hear your thoughts on what you've been listening to? 0344 499 1000 is the number you need. You could